I'm working at a little bit lower capacity today, but still having fun. I was gonna see. Let's first of all let's give an update on the redemption process. We essentially what's happened is that Vulcanized front end loaded the taint and didn't the taint analysis and didn't quite have all the work done for the for one side of the redemption, the clean path for the redemption process. So we're wrapping that up and getting that tested. So that's kind of the state of the redemption process. And what I'm trying to do is to get some more resources in to help with that, so that it can happen a little more rapidly, a little more quickly. So that's where that is. I'm going to talk to them and see if they want to come to either this Hangout or the Slack and answer anybody's questions, see if they're interested in that. They may just say, no, we'd rather stay heads down on getting the code out. And we'll run it, for at least 10 days from whenever it commences, so people can get a handle on that. Where I feel bad that we didn't quite hit the date that we wanted to, but I think now that we've got a little bit more focus on getting it done, we'll be able to get it out pretty soon. I don't want to announce any more dates, because I want to make sure that the Vulcanized people feel comfortable with their testing before we announce the dates. So that's my update on the redemption process. Ed, did you want to add anything more? Ian, you guys have been following what's going on.
No, I incorporated some instruction changes from Alex, but nothing else significant.
Okay, all right.
I'm waiting to let's see. A couple days ago, I also created some sample, Omni wallets with taint, so that the taint path can be tested.
That's right.
Time to set up, but that's I'm ready to test the platform as soon as it's ready.
Yep. And let's see. We have some updates on the AMP. The ROC token supply management afterwards. I've been engaged with Alex Bolkin. He's made some convincing arguments for an alternative model. We conducted an internal review, and I'm pretty convinced. I wanted to get Alex's permission before I published the model. So there's a few tweaks that we want to do to the document before we publish it. And since we had this hold up on the tech, I haven't published it yet, but hope to publish it a little later today. I think that's reasonable. Let's see. We do have the finalized terms and conditions, and we basically have everything ready to go as soon as that path is done. But I will definitely want to get feedback on the supply model. And did you have any thoughts on that?
No.
Okay. Cool. So the other thing I'd like to talk about. Hang on one second. I'll be right back.
So while everybody's waiting for Greg to return, I'm going to share this tagline document. If you want to just enter any input, we're probably going to get to that later on in the Hangout. Okay.
Yeah, go for that. Also, Christian, I really appreciated the opportunity to talk with the Starbase people.
Yeah, it seems pretty cool to talk to the Japanese. Are you? I just talked to Sergey from Lick. I know you said there was going to be about 2 days where you needed to clarify if you can come to Russia for the conference.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been trying to manage the Vulcanized thing, and so that got pushed to the back burner. Let me pop that back up to the top today. I'll talk to Sergey today.
Cool.
Right? Yeah. Right after Dev stand up, I'll reach out to him.
Yeah, and it's easier to get you to go than Vlad because he's Canadian, and I don't know, like, I know how to get a quick visa in the United States, but he has to do his own stuff. So, but he can join remotely, and if you can't make it, you can join remotely too if you want.
Okay, that's cool.
Hey, Christian, real quick for the people, who is Starbase?
It's a project in Japan. It's a sort of a crowdfunding platform like Waves. They're just on Ethereum, and they're looking to help incubate projects. And I don't know. I'll just keep the conversation open. They're in the development phase. They're trying to get the money to do their own project and all that. But they seem pretty cool, so it's good. It's one of the first projects in Japan that I know of outside of BitGirls. So. I'm sure there's more, but I don't speak Japanese, so.
Cool. Yeah, and one of the things that came up in the discussion with the Starbase people was how a crowd sale and crowdsourcing platform would partner very well with an incubator.
Right? Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So the incubator can do kind of the due diligence.
Sure.
Right, and then from there, the crowdsourcing and crowd sale platform can accelerate, the what we're calling incubatees cultures.
Yeah,
can accelerate the growth of the culture so that it can get out of the petri dish and into the wild and woolly laboratory.
Yeah, that's all excellent. I've been spending some time on thinking about the incubator or holding company and roadmap of different features and products and essentially incubated cultures that would make sense, and it's easy to come up with a long list of that, and then creating the dependencies in terms of timing sequences is where it starts to get interesting. For example, in the case of crowdfunding, what has to precede getting that solution to market, and so forth. What has to precede an attention economy? What has to precede X, Y, and Z? So that's a fun exercise to go through.
No, that's right. That's exactly right. So let's see. What are some other things? Sorry, I've got the vulcanized people here on the channel, so I was hoping to get them into Slack. Let me ask them and see if they want to come join and chat a little bit.
While we're waiting, I have a relatively short topic, which is so Greg and Evan and I met with Auto Capital on last Friday, and one number of things that were talked about. One of them was just the name and function of the what we were previously calling the incubator. He would like to see more of a holding company concept there. We may have talked about this last week, but I don't think so. So the difference is a holding company would be more of a pure investment vehicle and kind of invest in other startups or joint ventures with other, perhaps existing companies working on Ethereum or Bitcoin, and would incubate a little bit through mentoring, but primarily it would invest in other startups. So that's kind of a different name that you'll hear going forward is a holding company concept. And then, so just to be clear, as far as that investment would be concerned, money from the Auto Capital investment would come into the holding company, and the holding company would invest in others and as well as support RChain Cooperative. So that's the latest model that's being discussed.
So the projects would be done in the co-op, but funded from the holding company.
So, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Oh, so the projects would be projects in the co-op, but funded by the holding company. Is that the picture?
Well, all the projects would use RChain, but no, that's not how I would characterize it. All kinds of projects can happen on the RChain platform, independently or with companies. RChain, the cooperative, I see is focusing on the platform itself. Then one of the companies that would be building on top would be Lively Gig. The RChain holding company would also invest in additional companies or projects to build solutions. But that's not the only way that solutions get developed and funded. Lots of other things can happen in addition to what comes through the holding company. Or funding through the co-op, perhaps, right? So wholly independent things can happen. Does that answer your question, Jim?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. I see another question from HJ in the chat. I see, is RChain operating still in a legal manner with respect to scenario, IP, and other relations like stake and AMP holder? Well, I believe so. You mean the co-op in particular. Greg, you want to address this question? Kind of a
Well, our RChain Cooperative has never had any contractual relationship or otherwise with Scenario
right.
Limited. So yes, RChain is operating in a legal manner. The only questions that have ever arisen have to do with me and any non-compete agreements with Scenario Limited. And having reviewed those with counsel, there seems to be no issue along the lines of non-compete as far as I can tell, or legal counsel can tell. So yeah, I believe that we're all on the up and up here. I mean, certainly with respect to the technology as opposed to the IP, as opposed to any sort of non-compete agreement. The IP, as I've mentioned many times over the last 2 years, the IP is all in the public domain. So if you want to, the real core of the IP is the 2 row calculus papers. So this is a reflective higher order calculus and namespace logic, which were published under open source licenses. Specifically in the first case, it was the Creative Commons license. In the other case, I think it's Creative Commons, but I have to go double check. So so they were in the public domain, and essentially I signed over any ownership of that myself ages ago, over a decade ago. And those are the real pieces of IP that are essential for building out RChain. The remainder, the only other piece would be Casper, and that's work that's been going on jointly with Ethereum. So again, Scenario has no real claim there because the real innovations came from Vlad, and I learned about Casper through Vlad and then Vitalik. So I would have to say that there's no no IP claims that are interesting or useful there. They can all be tracked down quite clearly in the public domain, as I have been saying again and again and again in these sessions for the last 2 years. But I've also pasted the links in Slack multiple times, and you can just do a Google search for yourself. So hopefully that answers your question, but if you have any further questions, please do let me know. I'm happy to field those.
I've been telling people, trolls in the scenario and such that keep bringing up the IP. I've been saying that RChain grew out of the Casper research, which was funded by the Ethereum Foundation. Is that incorrect?
No, I would say that RChain came from the row calculus work.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it sort of came from both sides.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean the Casper work was so. I mean, if you look at it, it's actually worthwhile looking at this. And let me switch devices so I can draw, and people can see all the components. So I'll bring up OmniGraffle, but I'm gonna need to switch devices. So hang on, I'm gonna hang up here and then rejoin.
Hey HJ, thanks for doing that video. By the way, I didn't know if it's cool to share.
Oh yeah, it's a public video. So it was, for me, it was also a tryout to get familiar with iMovie on Mac, and there's some nice possibilities. So, but the whole process is not very clear yet, so I cannot finish it off. And it's too long, and maybe the music is not. I like the music, but I don't know if everybody likes it. It has some nice music of the crafty guitarist, and Greg is playing in this group, so I thought it was a nice tune. But, yeah, I can do some more, but maybe the process is a bit delayed, and so I can spend some more time on it.
Okay, so let's see here. Let me go grab OmniGraffle and make a new. Okay, so I've drawn this picture a few times, but let's draw it again because I think it's really worthwhile understanding what's going on. So in general, inside the container that is a node, we're going to have the VM state, right? So the VM runs inside the node. So if we call this, say, oh, let me do it this way. So this is an RChain node. And then what's inside? Well, we're going to have the VM, but in particular, there's a distinction that we want to make between the running instance. And in fact, it's perfectly reasonable for there to be, let me just call this a VM instance. And a VM instance versus there could be multiple of these because of the way we've organized this. And the way we've organized this is that these things serve what we call a namespace. So when you think about it in terms of Ethereum, this is kind of like a space of addresses. So each one of these is serving its own namespace. So it's perfectly reasonable then to imagine, let me do this way then. So I'll put this one back here. This one here. Finally, one more. So each one of these is serving a region of addresses, right? So you could think of those as regions of accounts or addresses or however you want to think about it. But they're really places where you could have important information, such as the balance in an account, or you might store a friends list, or some documents, or some photographs. So the namespace can be thought of as a set of keys, and the VM is serving a set of keys. Now, some of those keys, interestingly, also give you pointers to a program or a contract that's in flight. That's not quite done and is blocked on getting some I/O, and we call those continuations. Now, each VM instance has to be able to be stored against some state. So down here, we want kind of local state. So let me get that. I always forget where that is. That's over here. Okay, so there's some local state that keeps the key value information, and then the VM state is also stored in key value locations. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. You can not only have the VM serving a range of addresses, but you can have the state that's associated with the VM also be stored in a range of addresses. And you might want to keep, just for the purposes of security and performance and a bunch of other things, you might want to keep the state that's associated with the VM separate from the names that the VM is operating on. Unless, of course, there's self-maintenance or self-monitoring that the VM does. Hopefully, I've made this large enough that people can see the picture. Let me raise the font size in case. I haven't heard any complaints, but just in case. Is that visible, guys?
Yeah, it's fine. Everything's good.
Fine.
Okay, cool. So this is the RChain store, right? So this is effectively a sequence of blocks, right? And those blocks maintain differences on a key value state, right? So this is the local view of the distributed store, and then there's a corresponding mechanism for communicating with the network. So this is the RChain communications. All right, so this might be a queue, like a RabbitMQ or something else, right? But the main thing is this is how you talk to the remainder of the network. So if, for example, we draw another boundary like this one, Right, this is kind of the way this looks. Then there might be a whole other copy of this sitting out on the network over here somewhere. Let me just grab this guy one more time and move it over. Okay.
So what do you call that outer thing? That's essentially another VM or another physical node, right?
Really, the outer thing is just including the node together with the storage that serves the node, right? Because the node could be running, and if you were clever about the way you did this thing, then you could swap one of these out for another one, and the node could still keep running. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just looking for sort of a name for that outer box, but maybe it's not important.
Oh, it's so interesting. It says, okay, so maybe this one. There you go. Range, send it back. There we go. It's that one. All right. So, and then what you'd end up having is something like this. So, and let's not lose sight of what we were talking about. We're trying to answer Jim's question. And so let me just make sure that we keep that in mind. So we have, I don't know, something like this, which runs from the comms to the comms, right? But it goes through the wild and woolly internet. So here's the wild and woolly internet, right? And eventually, just quickly change the endpoint like that. Duplicate that one like that. Okay, so here we are. Okay, so there's the picture, and then what the consensus piece does is it makes sure that what's here and what's here are the same without having to have any kind of master-slave relationship, right? So these nodes there's no one in charge here, right? And yet, even though there's no process that's in charge, there's no sort of permanent leader, there's no centralized authority for truth, these two nodes see the same thing, right? And
Okay.
that's, go ahead.
Okay, that's with the assumption that they're listening to the three same namespaces.
That's correct. That they're listening to the same namespaces. That's correct.
Got it.
Or if they're participating in a namespace that that allows for transactions across the namespaces that they care about, then they're also it's in sync for those transactions where there's any sort of overlap.
Got it. And the reason I wanted to point that out was because if these were distinct namespaces or they just shared one namespaces, then the RChain stores are going to be different.
That's exactly right. That is precisely correct. Which
Where
means
it matters, they're going to agree.
That's right. So let's to put a fine point on that and make that really, really clear, and at the same time. So that's all right. That's big enough. Bring this down here and grab this one and duplicate it. Say put it up here. So then I guess I can grab this one, but not that. Pull this, not that. Okay, so now let's say that this one is working on a different set of namespaces. So let's call this, say, in1, and then the other ones we can't really see, so I'm not going to bother with them. But these namespaces are distinct. Then what will happen is that this storage doesn't really touch or interact or engage with this storage, or in particular, the transactions that might update this state doesn't really touch or engage with the transactions here or the transactions here. And so this node can come up and not be concerned or worried about this state. And so there's no need for any sort of consensus across these two. So you might imagine, for example, that over here you have video data or audio data, and you give it a dedicated subnetwork for serving up that data. And you keep that separate from other kinds of data. For example, you might keep that separate from financial data, or you might keep that separate from gameplay data, the history of the updates of a universe in a game, right? So all of those different kinds of things might be in their own separate namespace. You might shard the namespaces per application. You might shard the namespace per geographic region. You might shard the whatever is a reasonable way of decomposing the functionality for your subnetwork. Our architecture supports that. So Jim, in terms of what you were talking about, so the VM and the whole idea of namespaces and all of that was in the public domain for over a decade. And effectively what it was doing was, when I built BizTalk, I realized that there needed to be an abstraction around the namespace. Like we had a really cool architecture where I had a layer which I called the binding layer, which bound names to different kinds of technologies. So Xlang from Microsoft's BizTalk was decomposed into Slang, which was the scheduling language. You could think of that as the core contracting language, and Bang, which was the binding language. And I was dissatisfied with the formal properties of that kind of architecture. And that's what prompted me to, when I left Microsoft, to come up with a much cleaner, much more potent architecture and cleaner mathematics, which led to the whole namespacing stuff. And then I wrote that down in 2004, a few months after I left Microsoft, and then I published it in 2005. So that mechanism has been, under Creative Commons license, and this is all verifiable, in the public domain for over a decade. Now, the piece that is more recent is, Satoshi came up with his approach to keeping the stores in sync using proof of work. And then Vlad Vlad and Vitalik together came up with a proof of stake mechanism that was convincing. And so we've been working through all the details of that. And that IP is separate, and that largely belongs to Vlad and Vitalik. And to the best of my knowledge, they placed all of that in the public domain as well. So that's the kind of the lowdown on the IP and how that relates to the different pieces of functionality. Does that make sense? I just want to check in with Jim and make sure that he's satisfied that I answered the question.
Yeah, that's yeah. I guess I was overemphasizing the role of Casper in RChain here. As a consensus mechanism, it's important, and that came together with what you did before to make RChain what it is. But I see that the fundamental things about RChain are precede Casper.
That's right. So in particular, I think I can say this now. So I was in New York with a new foundation that's sort of the basic body of a new foundation that's going to explore the public-private net interface. One of the things that this emerging body, which is likely to be a kind of W3C standards-like body, this new body is quite keen on a reference architecture that has a pluggable consensus. Now, I'll be honest, a lot of us in the room are quite skeptical that you'll have pluggable, consensus that swaps out PBFT and proof of stake or proof of work. But at least to some level of abstraction, absolutely, the whole community is contemplating the idea that the consensus piece of the puzzle is going to be pluggable, that it's not a fixed thing in terms of the offering of these networks, right? So these networks, so it should be possible to take like the vast majority of the architecture and have it remain the same, and then provide a consensus algorithm for a particular subnet that is specific to that. Now, interestingly, what that's going to mean is that you have to have some compositional means, like imagine that one subnetwork of your overarching network is PBFT, so that's a practical Byzantine fault tolerance. That's your consensus mechanism, and the other one is another subnetwork is proof of work, and another subnetwork is proof of stake. In order to reason about the end-to-end correctness of applications that span all three subnetworks, you're going to have quite the time. Right?
Yep.
That's going to be very, very interesting. So again, I really strongly believe that if you want to be able to reason about the end-to-end correctness of things, of networks where you have potentially trillions of dollars, I'm pretty sure I can say that the institutions that were a part of this forming body certainly are institutions that move trillions of dollars today. So this is a reality that's going to happen. This is not some dream. This is a reality. It is going to be the case that blockchain eventually becomes part of networks that move trillions of dollars, and we have to be prepared for that. And part of being able to be prepared for that means that we have a means by which we can reason formally about the end-to-end correctness of the system. Otherwise, you're going to get these weird situations where you don't understand the transaction semantics, and things will go south. Go ahead.
While you have this diagram up, I had a few other questions that are kind of related to this. And so Navneet and I were talking an hour or two ago about some of our understanding the way that payments essentially would work. For example, payment to access content. So just to kind of level set on terminology, there'd be this software protocol access token that would be an economic token in the sense that it would pay for resources through the phlogiston mechanism, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And it's still an open discussion and debate whether there'll be one economic token or several.
Yeah. So if your token is you know what we could do though? Let me just do this really quick. Hang on, just to answer your question. I think I've got the RChain logo stuff right here. Hang on a second. Let's see.
So I really haven't asked my question yet.
Yeah, keep going.
So one of the questions is, does every read from a DApp or a client require payment to just read data.
I see what you're saying. So actually, there's quite a bit of flexibility in. So let's be really, really clear. The way Ethereum, the EVM worked was every single transition in the EVM was instrumented and cost something.
Right.
Now, I proposed in September of 2015, I proposed an alternative model in which you do a source-to-source translation, and I wrote that down in the row calculus.
Right.
And then later, or independently, I don't know which, Martin Beasy took the same approach in doing the EVM 2.0, where they do a source-to-source translation, and then the source-to-source translation, you provide a you provide the schedule you provide the gas schedule. In our case, it's the phlogiston schedule.
Right.
So we have a lot of flexibility. In general, I don't think that we want to be too onerous with respect to big core operations like arithmetic operations. And in-memory reads or local reads, but I think that this is going to have to be tunable, right? Because this is the mechanism by which you prevent denial of service. Anything that doesn't have a cost becomes an attack vector in terms of denial of service.
Right. Even lots of reads. Right.
Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. So,
okay. And then the second, and obviously if that data were already on the local node, it may be one cost versus if it had to go out onto the network and retrieve it, might be another cost, or somehow expanding the node to an additional namespace or something.
I think the way I would prefer to do this is to have schedules of costs that are associated with namespaces.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, I like that as well. When I think about so namespaces would have different guarantees associated with them. For example,
yes, exactly.
We're talking about moving $1 trillion through one namespace. It's going to be different than a Snapchat kind of app.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things, like back in the day, there was this notion of service level agreement. And I know that these days, a lot of people have shied away from service level agreement. But, and to a certain extent, it's a funny thing, right? Because if you think about net neutrality, like the whole movement of net neutrality is kind of against the idea of namespaces. But the reason they're against the idea of namespaces is because the namespaces come under centralized control, right? So, and they penetrate at a fairly deep level. But the reality is that from a more practical perspective, you'd like to be able to offer certain kinds of guarantees about service. In terms of compute, storage, and bandwidth that are not specifically tied to node instances, right? Node instances should be much more ephemeral because you want to be able to do load balancing. So again, think about it, right? If the VM instance state is in the store, then if I take this down because this node is on a machine that's red hot and I move it over to this one, there's no sweat, right? Because the state for this instance is up to date and synced up here, and so it lives over here as well. So I can bring up this VM instance here with no loss of service, no interruption of service whatsoever. Okay.
Exactly.
So that's a feature of RChain that makes it scalable. That makes it highly scalable. In fact, however, what you'd like to do is because of that mobility of VM, you tie service level agreements not to the VM instance, but to the namespace, which is a much more stable notion.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. So the namespace will be described kind of and not described once and not really change. So that's.
You mean it would be described once and not change?
That's correct. It's we can imagine dynamically changing namespaces, but that's much more science fiction, right? That's a particularly magical beast. I mean,
Yeah, so I'm thinking, for this particular for token X, it's going to live in namespace X, X prime or X whatever, and as part of that, we're going to say it has to have at least 10 nodes, or it has to have at least some calculation number of nodes in order for it to be reliable.
That's right. That's exactly right. Right. So service level agreement style capability goes with the namespace, not with the instances.
Got it.
Yeah. And that, go ahead.
So a particular service is going to stand up a namespace. Is that the way that you're thinking of doing this? Like a Snapchat app is going to make a namespace for its own service, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the way the internet works today, right? It's like you have RChain.slack.com or coinfund.slack.com, right? That's the way the internet is already trained to think that way. Services occupy namespaces.
Yeah. So another question about the tokens paying for the protocol is so there'll be source-to-source translation from the a smart contract or possibly even a transaction to pay for phlogiston. And does phlogiston cross nodes? Are there interactions of phlogiston, or is phlogiston just a local calculation of its local resources?
Yeah, that's a deep question. That's actually a really deep question. Yeah, so let's have a special session on that one because there's only 8 minutes left.
Cool. I yield my time.
No, but that's a really great question, and it's something that we've
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, phlogiston is local, right? But it turns out that in terms of because there's a global market, it's hard to keep it local.
Cool. Look forward to more discussion later on that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. My calendar, as you saw, was pounding on me that I need to get to dev stand-up. Let me just quickly check and see. I'm going to stop screen sharing. I'll just check and see one more time if the vulcanized people are around and they want to come and join us for a second.
Cool. While we wait for that, just letting everyone know that I'm going to be in the middle of moving, probably the 27th, 28th. There should be a weekend. So if something happens, if I'm not at a cafe or something for the Casper stand-up next week, whatever, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Be cool to get some of the Ethereum developers talking in Philly. I know they're already interested in setting some stuff up. They're having a tech conference in March, I think. So that I'm thinking about trying to invite some of the guys from Consensus down. I think that would be pretty cool. If anybody wants to come to Philly, we can set something up. I got a place now, so it's good.
That sounds great. You might want to ping Ryan Strauss, who's in Philly.
Yeah, I already talked to Ryan. I'm gonna hit him up when I'm there.
Cool. Yeah, in about 1.5 weeks or so, we're going to give a presentation of RChain in Seattle on the evening of the 30th. Greg will be the main presenter, and Joe Denman will be out here, and myself and Navneet and Shogo, and we'll be, and we're going to invite the local Ethereum community and some others, and have it recorded and probably even live streamed. So we're looking forward to that.
Sweet, that's awesome. Yeah, I enjoyed that last time when it came out there in April. I don't
Oh,
want
yeah, I
to.
remember that.
I don't want to bring up Slockit really, but like, is
That
any
was Lockett at that meeting, yeah.
yeah, are any of those guys around? I know some of them were in town for like the general sort of talk, but
There are people associated with Slockit in town, yes.
that's cool. Hopefully they'll.
One guy, yeah.
I would like still to see something come of that project, even though they're kind of. It's not the best reputation right now, but I'd still like them to do something. So.
Yeah, I mean, their use case they presented at that time was like Airbnb, that you reserve a building, or a rental space on the blockchain, and then you go to it with your private key and it unlocks the door. I think it's awesome. That's one of the use cases for Slockit.
Right. Definitely need some hardware up in this space. I mean, really the only hardware that exists are wallets right now. There's nothing.
Well, but there's internet connected blocks on the marketplace, and so just connecting the two of those things together.
Oh, and that's another really, really important application of namespaces, right? You want devices and device networks to have their own namespace.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. IoT and reputation and namespaces are all really tightly related.
That's exactly right. And then namespaces also become fundamental to a higher level notion of identity, right? I mean, one of the things that's pretty clear when you talk about identity for either major blockchain technology, whether you're talking Ethereum or Bitcoin, is fundamentally, what you have is the notion of an address, and that isn't tied to a party, right? Because there's a commitment to a kind of anonymity.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to. So when you generalize from an address to a name, then the notion of name here again supports this particular flavor of anonymity. But what's crucial is that you can build a notion of identity out of behaviors over a collection, over a namespace, right? So the way to think about this is, you don't know who the party is, but you know that they serve up Amazon.com, and you know that they, and in a reliable way, they serve up Amazon.com, and they reliably serve up Audible.com, and they right? And so these are the this collection of names over which they're reliably serving and responding, and the kinds of behavior that you expect from a reputational perspective that them to engage in over that collection of names becomes a notion of identity.
Yeah, even if they're a reliable sort of aggregator. Yeah, if you think of the major media publications, how they used to have great reliable reputations, even though all kinds of content was coming through them.
Yeah, exactly. That's correct. And this is a notion that scales, right? So if as an individual you only want a particular party to know one aspect of your identity. So, for example, as a potential employee, you don't want to reveal your address, let's say, but you would like to reveal that you have certain credentials. For example, you have a degree from a particular college, right? You wouldn't have to reveal your address. You wouldn't have to reveal many other organizational affiliations. You just have to provide a kind of guarantee that you have the credentials that this particular employer requires of parties that are committing work on its behalf. Right. So then again, that's a very tightly controlled namespace. And then over time, if that relationship grows, then you can grow the names or the channels over which the employer and employee are interoperating. Right, and over time, then both parties get a picture of the identity. Well, these are the names, the channels that they serve or respond to, and these are the kinds of behaviors that they are contractually bound to perform when served or serving over these channels. right? So this is a higher level notion of identity. All right, thank you guys, and I will give updates as soon as I have them about the state of the redemption, the final piece of the redemption process code, and I'll put those in Slack. In Slack, in the announcements channel. I'm going to jump over to the dev stand-up now.
All right, man. Peace out.
Peace out.
Peace.
All right. Does anybody have anything else? I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. If that's all right.
If you guys want to vote on these taglines real quick, I can just call them out.
Yeah, sure. Or if you have a Google Doc, you can share your screen.
Yeah.
I thought I set up a polling feature on this channel, so it makes the voting a lot easier, but...
Yeah, whatever. We could just have a quick little conversation on it real quick.
Cool.
All right, yeah, there's only 3 options. So we're targeting obviously developers of the RChain, and then developers of the decentralized applications on top of it. So we have RChain, building integrity, safety, and scalability into Web 3.0. RChain, building scalability, compositionality, and concurrency into blockchain 3.0. RChain, building the scalable blockchain. I like that one. That one sounds good. And then as you can see, the other ones, RChain, enabling Web 3.0 with security, privacy, and scalability. RChain, enabling trustworthy exchange and global collaboration. RChain, your own internet. RChain, own your digital presence on Web 3.0. So if you guys just want to input, you can see on the side, there's plenty of, we're scaling it 1 to 4. You just comment whichever one you want. And then day by day, I've been narrowing them down. Today, we're supposed to come to a consensus. So I think by the end of the day, we're going to have a couple of these picked. If you want to input right now, say it on the Hangout or just comment in the Slack or excuse me, on the doc. And then, yeah, thanks for the input.
Can I ask why you have 2 different taglines here, one for developers, and why not just one tagline overall?
Ed, do you have an answer to that one? So the reason was because originally I started with one tagline, and then through the iterations, it was discussed about having 2, since there's 2, even though they're closely related, there are 2 different target audiences, I guess would be the way to put it. So that's how this came about.
Is it necessary to have 2? Because it seems like it adds to the, kind of mixes up the message, makes it more complicated.
So that's a good, valid point. Is there any other opinions on that?
I mean, they're not too much different anyway.
So Ian is proposing we go back to just 1 because they're not different. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Not particularly. I mean, I guess I can just add my comment in the Google Doc. The guy from YouTube saying that you probably only, it said, we're mostly just focused on developers, so the tagline, I mean, I think they in general all look good. If you want to just stick straight to crypto, the third one, building a scalable blockchain, that's like very simple. I mean,
Ed and Navneet, are you guys in here?
No, they left for the developer stand-up.
Yeah.
The possible benefit of these others is they just have more, keywords. And there's perhaps a benefit in that, but I kind of like concision and simplicity.
Me too.
Right.
But
That's what I started
those
out
other
with.
words are important. People searching for those words, we'd love for them to to see RChain out there.
Again, yep, I agree. That's why it started with one. I'm in this iteration process. So thank you for your feedback. We'll have some finalized. I guess I'll talk to Ed and Navneet again, and then we'll figure it out.
Cool, man. All right, well, I'm probably gonna pop off this recording then.
Peace.
Peace, peace.